I'd like to continue with our series on the Laudato Si action platform, follow up to that great letter that Pope Francis wrote about the environment, Laudato Si, where he talks about the need for an ecological conversion that we need to undergo in order to make the changes that are necessary for our planet so that the air, the water, the soil that surrounds us is kept pure and clean and good not only for our generation, but obviously for future generations. Uh, Part of the legacy of the Industrial Revolution, we've made some great progress, obviously, with the inventions that have come out, the technology that has come out, but the downside of that is the pollution that the Industrial Revolution has caused in terms of fouling up the air that we breathe, damaging the soil, damaging the water, and the effects it has on animal life and human life, plant life, vegetative life. So, as we look at that, one of the things that we want to concentrate on is what we call the idea of pollution reduction. So, as we look at the situation today, we say there is far too much pollution. Obviously, there's a need to reduce it. The question becomes, well, how can we do it in the most effective, the quickest way, so that we don't continue to damage the air that we breathe, continue to damage our soil, our water, and be so destructive in terms of the environment. Obviously, when you look at the situation today, you'd have to say, well, gee, we have not been very good stewards of the gift that God has given us. One of the things that we learn from indigenous peoples, we sometimes tend to look down upon them in terms of, they're primitive. They haven't made the progress that we have made. But sometimes you wonder in terms of who is going to have the last laugh in this situation. When you look at what has happened post-industrial revolution, you say, well, wait a minute. You know, progress has been made, but damage has been done. And one of the remarkable characteristics of indigenous cultures is their sense of stewardship, their sense of treasuring the earth, seeing the earth as sacred, which, of course, in our tradition, our religious traditions, we look and say, of course, it would be sacred because, number one, it's created by God, it's a reflection of God, so it has the touch of the divine within it, the creation, but also the sense of the incarnation. If Jesus, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, took on human flesh as we believe, then certainly we have to reverence what Jesus has embraced. And when you look at it, you say, well, we haven't done such a good job of that. Now, part of the problem with that is not being able always to recognize it. We go out and we breathe the air and we say, oh, this is fine, no problem. But then we learn that there are certain people who, when they go out and they breathe in the air, have difficulties. They have lung conditions, asthma related to the air that we breathe and the pollution that's in the air. Some of us pick up on it much more quickly because of the nature of our bodies. Others of it doesn't seem to damage as much, but the damage is being done. We see it, of course, a lot of times when there is a kill off of fish. We say, oh, there's something the matter with the water. We see it when the water is tested in Flint, Michigan, and other cities, and we say, well, gee, the problem here is people can't drink this water. They drink it and they get sick. Well, is something happening? Well, when we look at it and say, well, it's not a problem in my community. My water is fine. People in Flint, well, it's a shame, but it doesn't affect me. So we look at the environment and we say, what can we do to improve it? And what can we do to make it better so that it is good for all? A very important reality. And so reducing pollution is important. And the United Nations has taken an active role in this, obviously, in terms of the environment. And the UN has an environment program, and they talk about the emissions gap. What is the emissions gap? The emissions gap is what we are doing to reduce pollution, but yet we're falling short of the goal. And when that happens, the report tells us we are heading for a global catastrophe. You hear those words and say, well, wait a minute. The air I breathe is fine, water is fine, soil looks good, I'm growing plants, flowers. What's the problem? We tend to have a narrow vision of it, unfortunately. So we have to look at the larger picture and see, well, what are we heading for? And the basic problem is that we have the fossil fuels that we're burning, the oil and the natural gas and the coal, and the byproducts of our burning these fossil fuels to create energy to power our cars, heat our homes, cool our homes in the summer. All of these things are necessary for civilization as we know it, obviously. We're used to them. They're what we've grown up with. They're what we expect. It's our normal. But the problem is all of these fossil fuels that we're using are damaging our environment. They're damaging our air, our water, and our soil, in conjunction, of course, with other realities. The climate analytics looks at this situation and says, the pace on climate action is very slow. It's really too slow. Global goals were set by the 2015 Paris Agreement 7 years ago to limit warming to 2.7 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. The current pace, warming will hit 5 degrees Celsius by 2100 if we just keep the current pace. And our tendency is not just to keep the current pace, but to add on to that current pace. Current pledges by countries would bring it down to 4.7 degrees from that 5 degrees, but still would be above the goal that we consider important to reach. It has already warmed 2 degrees since pre-industrial times. 2 degrees. Well, we don't have too much wiggle room here if it's, warmed 2 degrees. We will probably exceed the goals of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's still possible, but we need a 45% emissions reduction by 2030. So we need to begin this emissions reduction within the next 8 years. There's a 50% chance of hitting the 1.5 Celsius mark only in the next 5 years. So the importance here is taking action. And we'll continue to look at this very important topic, the need for reducing our pollution.